Sony was an absolute powerhouse when it came to original titles that were exclusive to the PlayStation family in the early 2000s. Original characters with original worlds drew players in and gave PlayStation players the ammo they needed to say that PlayStation was where it was at when it came to gaming. Many fans, including myself, think of the holy trinity of the PS2 when someone mentions gaming in the early 2000s. That holy trinity being Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, and the subject of today's video, Sly Cooper. The first game in the Sly Cooper series, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, appeared on the PlayStation 2 in 2002, about 2 years after the PS2 released in North America. Talking about saying two a lot in one sentence, am I right? This new franchise was welcomed with well above average scores from reviewers and went on to be a multi-game series, making more appearances on the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and the PlayStation Vita. Despite this game's success, and despite myself being a PS2 player when the game was released into the world, I never got around to playing the game. As is tradition, I am behind the curve. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus revolves around a small band of quote-unquote thieves. And I say thieves with quotes because this band isn't really robbing anyone on sight. They more often than not steal from other criminals, so the two wrongs make a right? Well, in Sly's eyes, it sure does. This small band of thieves include our main character Sly Cooper, the thieving raccoon, Bentley, the tech-savvy turtle, and Maury, the getaway-driving hippopotamus. Sly Cooper came across this group of misfits when he arrived at the orphanage where he was raised. You see, this game, despite being rated E for everyone, has a heavy backstory thanks to Sly's parents being flat-out murdered by the group known as the Fiendish Five. This murder took place on the day Sly was supposed to inherit his family's treasure, the Thievius Raccoonus, a How to Be an Expert Thief for Dummies book that Sly's family kept for generations, adding new thieving techniques and passing the knowledge down from Cooper to Cooper. When I saw this intro cutscene, I had to process this for a minute, as having the main character's parents get the Batman treatment was a little jarring. This was a kid's game, right? The Fiendish Five weren't there just to commit a cardinal sin, though. They also wanted to nab pages from the Thievius Raccoonus. With Sly's parents murdered and his family's precious tome of thieving knowledge missing several of its pages, Sly vows to get revenge for this insidious wrongdoing. With these new friends made and their goal of being thieves themselves set in stone, the group sets off to start tracking down each member of the Fiendish Five to get revenge and to retrieve the missing pages that were stolen from Sly's family. Easy enough backstory and goal to follow, right? Find each member who wronged Sly and collect the pages that were stolen. Now, really quick, I want to mention that the game starts off with a beautiful transition from title screen to gameplay, as starting the game drops you right into the first stage of the game, Paris, France. Before Sly can begin his ultimate goal, he has to gather some intel first on the Fiendish Five, and the Interpol headquarters has just the info that Sly needs to get started. So as I mentioned, we transition right into the first stage, and this first stage is a good setting to get familiar with the controls and how to move Sly around his environment as a sneaky little raccoon. However, the first problem I had with this game came up at this introduction into the controls. The controls just felt off? I'm not sure how to put it exactly, but they just felt sluggish to me, and Sly didn't handle like I thought he would, precise and accurate. Instead, it felt like a little clunky is probably the best way to say it. Now, modern games may have spoiled me in a way, so I'm not going to say this problem solely lies on the game. It's probably the fact that modern games handle very well and respond snappily these days. Either way, it's not a huge ding on the game itself, just an annoyance. But I cannot forgive the lack of customizability when it comes to the controls themselves. I was not a fan of the camera going in the same direction as the right analog stick when I went to make adjustments. Call me a freak, but when I move the analog stick left, I don't want the camera to go left. I want it to go right. Instead, this game, as it is set up, has the stick move left and the camera move left. If the camera moves right, then the stick is moving right. Not really a fan of this at all, and you can't change it, unfortunately. Big miss in my opinion is I can't see it as being very hard to program into the game. Besides the camera being a little funky in my opinion, the button layout on the controller made sense and felt pretty good overall. Over time, I did get used to how Sly handled, but the first hour or so was a little jarring and took me some time to get used to. Okay, enough of me complaining about the controls. Back to the story. After some basic platforming and sneaky stealth movements and getting familiar with how this all handles and plays, Sly and his team run across Inspector Carmelita Fox, an officer that has had Sly in her sights for some time with the hopes of bringing him down. You run across Carmelita quite a few times in this game, and this stage introduces her gameplay mechanic. When you see her, run. She attempts to shoot you while you avoid her shots by platforming and using your stealthy skills to ultimately get away from her. With this first attempt thwarted by us, we retrieve the case file that Sly was after. This case file gives Sly the information we need to start going after the first criminal in the Fiendish Five, Sir Raleigh the Frog, found in Wales. Sly Cooper does not have an overworld per se. Instead, each of the Fiendish Five have their own stage, and this stage has a hub, which contains the levels and the minigames you'll need to play through. So, upon arriving at Sir Raleigh's stage, we get dropped off into what I call Stage 1 of that stage, where you have to infiltrate into the hub that I just mentioned earlier. Each stage contains clues found in glass bottles. If the player collects all the clues within a stage, they may approach a safe that is found within each stage, in which Bentley can decipher the code found inside these clue bottles. Once deciphered, Sly can break into the safe and retrieve blueprints for the Fiend's headquarters, or a page from the Thievius Raccoonus, which contains a new skill that Sly can learn immediately. As the game goes on, Sly will learn more skills, which can be hot swapped really quick by using the L2 or R2 buttons. The blueprint shows Sly, via his binoculars, clues around the stage and breakable objects. This is very handy if you are a completionist trying to get every clue in a stage. Now, the main and I guess the most important goal of each stage is to retrieve the key found at the end of it. This key is retrieved by Sly in order to go even deeper into the Fiend's headquarters, which then ultimately leads to facing off against the Fiend. Sir Raleigh's stage requires Sly to collect a total of 7 keys, with 3 in the first half of the hub and 4 more in the second half. Out of these 6 stages are the traditional platforming gameplay that was shown in the intro, but one stage has a minigame that needs to be won in order to collect a key. This minigame has Sly pilot a submarine that shoots missiles, which in turn fights off crabs going after treasure chests for some reason. Regardless, collect 40 chests and win the key. When all 7 keys have been collected, Sly unlocks a cannon. Not kidding about that he ultimately uses to launch himself directly into Sir Raleigh's lair, which prompts the first boss fight. Now, before we get into this boss fight, I want to talk about, I guess, what you would maybe call gatekeeping when it comes to difficulty in video games over time. You know, there was always that one hard game to beat from the NES in the 80s and 90s. There was always that one hard game to beat on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, back in the 90s, late 90s. And, games over time have become easier, I would say. So going back to 2002, this game isn't super difficult by any means, but it's that traditional difficulty where you have to learn a boss fight. I get Elden Ring and Dark Souls vibes, not to that same standard obviously, but the same concept of here's a boss you've never seen before. You gotta learn its patterns, learn how they're going to attack, learn how they're going to move, and each time you unsuccessfully, don't beat the boss, you just get better each time. And this game really brought me back to that, as Sir Raleigh himself isn't too difficult, but I had to get acclimated to that kind of boss fight style again. It's not difficult, like I said, but I would be lying if I said I didn't have any trouble with it. I just had to learn the fight. As I came into this game absolutely blind, I didn't know what to expect. So the first few tries, maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so, I had to learn. But once that learning was complete and knew what to expect, the fight wasn't that hard and I did beat him. I do want to say that I don't think the difficulty came from the boss himself, but more of the brutal hit system that is implemented into this game. You see, a Sly can only get touched, burned, zapped, or drown one time. That is unless you collect 100 coins in a stage or find a lucky charm. If you get those 100 coins, you are presented a lucky charm, but lucky charms are also found laying about in some stages. And these charms allow an additional hit to Sly before he's considered dead, and you have to use another life to start over again. But don't get any crazy ideas here, as you can only stack a total of 2 charms, making a golden charm, which makes your total number of hits for each life 3. I kinda wish by default you started off with maybe the golden charm, which would be a full stack, but then on the other hand, I feel like that would make the game a little too easy. So I do understand the balancing act the developers had to do here. I just wish maybe there's a little bit more forgiveness in that, because every life you have is on a tightrope. Now, there is some generosity if you just flat out suck at the game, or you come across a certain part of the stage you just cannot get past, and where the game will give you a free lucky charm when you start your next life. So all these deaths that you are seeing through this playthrough are because of these very extremely limited hits that you have to play with for each life that you have in this game. Despite the difficulty and despite the very limited hits you have to play with in this game, I soon found myself triumphant over Sir Raleigh. He was defeated and Sly got to reclaim a page for his Thievius Raccoonus. We can't celebrate too long though, because hot on our tail is Inspector Fox, who swoops in and nabs the defeated Sir Raleigh. Sly slips away undetected, she gets to grab the baddie, everybody wins, right? Even though we did the work to defeat him, she got the credit. Oh well, we're moving on. The next stage revolves around Mugshot, who's found in Mesa City, Utah. Number 2 of the Fiendish 5 is more or less the same as before. Get dropped off outside the headquarters, penetrate inside the headquarters, and find the required keys to get to the boss fight. 7 keys are required to face Mugshot, 2 of which are obtained via minigames, and 1 is obtained by a chase from good old Inspector Fox. The 2 minigames in this level are a frustrating race that is completed using Mori, and a first-person shooter-like game in which Sly covers Mori while he makes a sprint for the key. The later of the 2 isn't hard at all, just follow Mori and shoot any enemies or obstacles that get in his way, and he'll make his way to grab a key and grab it for you. Now the racing, that wasn't fun in my opinion. The AI is damn good, and the vehicle you control feels like it's on ice no matter what you do. This minigame took me several attempts to complete, and when I did beat it, it felt like I got lucky more than anything, as the AI was running into themselves, leading them to slow down while I had the opportunity to pass all of them. When all of the keys were gathered, I took on Mugshot, another boss that gave me a good challenge. But once I figured out how the fight would go, it became a matter of executing everything to a T. Not much swinging the cane this go round. This fight was more of a dodge bullets and flip mirrors to defeat Mugshot sort of thing. Again, once you know how it's supposed to go, it becomes trivial. After Mugshot is defeated, we get the same story elements as we did with Sir Raleigh. Sly grabs a piece of the Thievius Raccoonus, Inspector Fox gets the freshly defeated baddie, and off we go to the next member of the Fiendish 5, Ms. Ruby. Now at this point I'm sure you picked up on the gameplay loop. Find the next big bad's headquarters, find a way to break in, collect enough keys to challenge them, and finally defeat them. The next 2 stages are the same exact formula. Not that this is a bad thing, but to respect your time, I'm not going to cover them in great detail. To simply put it, Ms. Ruby is in Haiti and Panda King is in China. Both of these last stages have everything the first 2 stages have, including some mini-games that need to be beaten in order to grab the keys needed. One thing I do want to note, however, during the 3rd stage in Ms. Ruby's domain, I started feeling off, like physically off. I recall starting her stage on a Friday night and having lots of energy and planned on playing to at least 2 in the morning. However, only about 30 minutes into her stage, this strange feeling came over me. I couldn't figure it out, but it felt like nausea. I tried to push through, but then I started to get a headache on top of the nausea. So I called it quits for the night, popped some Tums, and went to bed. Waking up the next morning, I felt 100% better, but I was still curious on why I felt the way I did. The dinner I had that night wasn't contaminated, as my wife was perfectly fine. Again, I had tons of energy, I slept well the night before, so I just couldn't figure it out. On a random whim, I searched Sly Cooper, motion sickness, Reddit. Sure enough, a few threads popped up with people experiencing the same symptoms as me, from PlayStation 2 players to PSV players, even to the recent PS5. It turns out the overall blurriness and the motion blur that's used in this game has caused other players to have motion sickness as well. Combine these blurry elements and the PlayStation 2 being pushed to its limits and starting to drop some frames and just starting to feel sluggish and chugging, that might explain the nausea and the overall bad time I was having. And it must have been the particles that were used in Miss Ruby's stage, because I didn't notice any slowdown or just frames being dropped until this stage. The first two, the intro, even later stages like 4 and the final stage, I never noticed this again. But stage 3, I don't know, it was just having a hard time processing everything. I guess because the stage is in a swamp, you get a bunch of, I don't know, dust, debris, maybe bugs in the air. They're trying to replicate that, and that adds up over time on a CPU. So just like a note there, it's not a huge game-breaking thing, but let me tell you, when I hit stage 3, it hit me hard. So while I do love beating games, I don't particularly like feeling sick. So that Saturday morning, when I was feeling better again, I decided that I'd give it one more go. But this time, I would give up on collecting clues and start blasting through the game as fast as I could to hopefully avoid triggering another episode of motion sickness. I blasted through Ms. Ruby's stage, beat her boss, quote-unquote battle, and moved on to Panda King. Once at Panda King's and the final stage, the PS2 wasn't chugging anymore, and I was able to keep playing with no motion sickness. Now, it would be a crime in itself to not talk about Ms. Ruby's boss fight, as it's not a boss fight in your traditional sense. There's actually very little combat involved in this one, as it's more of a rhythm game. You follow the on-screen buttons and press them on beat, and you get closer to Ms. Ruby. You get close enough, swing your cane, and you start the rhythm game all over again, and you rinse and repeat until she's defeated. This boss fight actually gave me some Parappa the Rapper vibes, which isn't a bad thing at all. I did enjoy the breakup in monotony when it came to these boss fights. So with 4 out of the 5 Fiendish 5 defeated, we move on to the last challenge. The last member of the Fiendish 5, Clockwork, who is based out of Russia for this one. This stage is not typical when compared to the last 4 stages. They changed the recipe up just a little bit. This stage does have some platforming, some mini-games, and speed-based challenges, but there are no keys to gather, as Sly and the gang are just aiming to get to Clockwork himself to ultimately defeat him. Sly does run into Inspector Fox, but she is in trouble this time, and Sly just can't walk away without helping her out. After Sly helps her out, she decides to join Sly for one minigame, so it's not very impactful, but still cool to see them join up just for a little bit. When Sly does get to Clockwork, a final boss battle happens. This final boss fight has multiple phases that you must go through to ultimately defeat him. If you mess up once, you're going to start the entire battle all over again. This boss fight did take me quite a few tries, as the jetpack didn't handle as I would like it. Is again, like the rest of the game, kind of laggy and slow, but I did get the hang of it in the end. Once you do defeat Clockwork for, the second time, I would say, you go into the third phase, which is more or less just some really precise platforming. And this gave me some issues, as the path needed to get to him wasn't exactly laid out as I expected. I had to learn, I guess like every other boss fight, as I went, and once I learned the pattern and what to look for, it became easy, and I finally defeated him. And with that, the Fiendish 5 have been defeated, and revenge has been had by Sly and his gang. A small little cutscene plays out, and Inspector Fox gives Sly 10 seconds to run for it before she pursues him. He avoids capture one last time by bamboozling our favorite Inspector. The game finally wraps up, and the credits play. As I mentioned at the start of this video, this game is part of what I call the holy trinity that Sony and players held in very high regards, and I can see why. The overall game was beautiful with its cell shading and vibrant stages. The challenges it provided, while frustrating at certain times, were still good fun. I loved the characters, their designs, and what drove them. The music for each stage and boss fight fits perfectly and always made me feel like I was a true burglar trying to pull off a successful heist. This game never had a dull moment and kept me engaged to the point of finding a way to persevere when having motion sickness in the third stage. That alone should say how much I love this game. While I have no desire to play this game again, I would play the other games in the Sly Cooper series without any hesitation. I do have the second and third game in my PlayStation 2 library. Now I just need the time to play them and visit Sly again to see what this mischievous raccoon is up to in the sequels. Hopefully he can steal my attention a few more times. If you made it to the end of the video, I thank you. I really do. I'm still new to this. This is only my, third, I think, video at this point on YouTube for video game reviews and just overall impressions. So still getting the hang of it. So if you have any feedback, anything that you want to see me do differently, or maybe you want me to play, please leave a comment down below and consider subscribing. Definitely not required, as I am a complete newbie and still learning how all of this works. So your view is more than enough. So until next time, thank you again.